Most people imagine prisons as physical places, walls, bars, confinement enforced by force. But the Gnostic texts describe a far more effective form of imprisonment, one that requires no walls at all. According to the ancient writings, the Archons did not enslave humanity through chains. They enslaved it through distraction, not through domination, but through participation. This is why the prison is invisible, because those inside it believe they are free. The Archons are not described as creatures stalking the world. They are described as rulers of systems, patterns that govern how reality is interpreted. They do not command obedience. They shape perception. This distinction is crucial. A being can be resisted. A system is obeyed unconsciously. The Apocryphon of John explains that the Archons emerged alongside creation, not as invaders, but as administrators. They organize, they categorize, they divide, above and below, sacred and profane, worthy and unworthy. Through these divisions, consciousness learns to see itself as separate, and separation is the first requirement of control. Once the soul accepts division as real, it begins to measure itself, to compare, to evaluate, to judge its position. This is how the prison forms, not externally, internally. The Archons do not need to convince the soul it is trapped. They only need to convince it that it must become something else, something better, something purer, something more enlightened. The moment this belief takes hold, the prison is complete, because the soul no longer rests where it is. It projects itself into the future, always becoming, never arriving. The texts describe this as counterfeit spirit, not darkness, not evil, but imitation, a false sense of movement, a feeling of progress without transformation. This is why the prison feels productive. People feel busy, engaged, evolving. But nothing fundamental shifts because the structure of perception remains untouched. The Archons thrive in systems, religion, spirituality, social order, even self-improvement. Anywhere identity can be shaped, ranked, or refined. They do not oppose spirituality, they absorb it. They turn awakening into hierarchy, into levels, into stages. This is why so many seekers feel exhausted. They have not failed. They have simply been working within the prison, trying to escape it, using its own logic. The Apocryphon of John does not warn about a future invasion. It warns about a present condition, a way of seeing the world that keeps consciousness fragmented, distracted, externally focused. The prison is not maintained by fear alone. It is maintained by meaning, by the belief that something essential lies elsewhere. That fulfillment is ahead. That clarity will arrive later. This belief keeps attention moving, and moving attention never sees the structure it moves within. The Archons do not hide. They operate openly, in language, in values, in assumptions about what life is for. And because these assumptions feel normal, they go unquestioned. This is the genius of the invisible prison. Nothing appears wrong. Life continues. Systems function. The world makes sense. And yet, something essential feels distant, always just out of reach. This is not accidental. The texts make it clear the prison was designed to feel natural, to feel reasonable, to feel inevitable. Because a prison that feels natural does not need guards. It sustains itself. This is why the Gnostic warning was buried, not because it was false, but because it was disruptive. It threatened the foundations of order, not by rebellion, but by awareness. To see the prison is to weaken it, and awareness cannot be regulated. This is where the danger lies, not in the Archons themselves, but in the moment They are recognized, because recognition does not fight the system. It renders it unnecessary. And what becomes unnecessary eventually dissolves. This is the beginning of the warning, not an ending, the first crack in the invisible prison. The invisible prison does not survive through force. It survives through habit, through the repetition of patterns so familiar that they disappear into the background of daily life. The Archons do not announce themselves. They speak through assumptions, through what feels obvious, through what no one thinks to question. According to the Gnostic texts, control is most effective when it becomes identity, when the soul no longer experiences itself directly, but through roles, names, stories, expectations. This is how the prison adapts to every era. In the ancient world, it appeared as rigid hierarchies and divine law. In the modern world, it appears as personal identity, personality, self-image, narratives about who you are and who you are becoming. The Archons do not demand obedience. They encourage self-definition. They invite the soul to say, I am this, I am not that. I must improve, I must evolve. Each declaration tightens the structure, because identity is a boundary, and boundaries create inside and outside. Once there is an inside, there is fear of loss. Once there is an outside, there is desire to reach it. This constant movement sustains the prison. Modern spirituality unknowingly reinforces this pattern. It tells the seeker they are asleep, broken, incomplete, and then offers a path toward wholeness. But the very belief in incompleteness is the lock. The Archons do not oppose awakening, they redefine it. They turn it into achievement, into progress, into a future state. As long as awakening is something that will happen, attention remains displaced, always leaning forward, never resting. This is why so many people feel they understand the truth intellectually, yet remain unchanged. Understanding alone does not dissolve perception. It often strengthens it. The Archons operate through concepts, even sacred ones, especially sacred ones, because concepts feel safe, they feel solid, they provide orientation. But orientation is another word for limitation. The Gnostic warning was never against knowledge, it was against borrowed knowledge. Truth received secondhand. Truth believed rather than seen. This is why the prison is invisible, because it is built from meaning, from explanations, from stories that give life coherence. And coherence feels comforting, even when it confines. The Archons maintain order by ensuring the soul is always interpreting, evaluating, comparing, measuring its state. Am I awakened yet? Am I closer than before? Am I doing this correctly? These questions seem harmless, even spiritual, but they reinforce the observer, the one who stands apart from life and evaluates it. That separation is the core of the prison. The soul becomes a manager of its own existence, monitoring progress, tracking insights, accumulating experiences, yet never dissolving the distance between itself and what is. This is why the prison feels endless. There is always another layer, another realization, another step. The Archons do not need to deceive, they only need to delay. To ensure clarity is always postponed, because postponed clarity is no clarity at all. The texts describe this as distraction, not entertainment, not noise, but inner distraction, attention pulled away from direct perception, lost in interpretation. This is why silence feels uncomfortable, why stillness feels unproductive, why presence feels empty at first, because presence offers nothing to improve, nothing to become, nothing to chase. And this threatens the entire structure. The invisible prison does not collapse through rebellion. It collapses through irrelevance, when the soul no longer invests attention in its stories, when it stops narrating itself, when it rests without purpose. This is why awakening is not dramatic. It does not arrive with light or visions. It arrives as simplicity, as ordinariness, as the end of commentary. The Archons lose influence the moment attention returns to what is already here, not as an object, not as a concept, but as immediate presence. This is the danger the texts point toward, not an external enemy, but the end of mediation, when nothing stands between awareness and experience. The prison has no function, because it was never holding anything. It was only directing attention away. This is how the invisible prison operates today, quietly, persistently, through identity, through meaning, through the promise of future clarity. And this is why it is so difficult to detect, because it feels like you. The most difficult part of the invisible prison is not that it deceives, it is that it feels sincere. This is why even the most devoted seekers remain trapped, not because they lack discipline, not because they lack intelligence, but because the prison adapts to sincerity itself. The Archons do not fear the seeker, they rely on them, because seeking, when misunderstood, becomes the most efficient form of containment. The moment a person identifies as a seeker, a subtle division is created. There is who I am now and who I am trying to become. This division appears harmless, even noble, but it quietly reinforces distance. Distance between awareness and life. Distance between presence and experience. The seeker lives oriented toward a future version of themselves, more awake, more healed, more complete. And as long as this future exists, the present is never enough. This is how the prison tightens, not through restriction, but through hope. Hope becomes the mechanism, the belief that something essential has not yet arrived. That clarity will come later. That freedom is earned. The Archons thrive in this gap, because the gap is endless. There is always another insight to integrate, another shadow to confront, another level to transcend. And with each step, the seeker becomes more invested in the journey, less available to what is already here. The Gnostic texts warn about this inversion. They describe how truth is turned into process, how liberation is postponed indefinitely, how awakening becomes a path instead of a recognition. This is why the most devoted seekers often feel the most pressure. They are always almost there, always improving, always refining, but never arriving. The prison does not punish them. It rewards them with meaning, with identity, with a sense of purpose. These rewards are subtle. They feel spiritual. They feel elevated. But they keep attention outward, focused on progress, focused on becoming, focused on comparison. The seeker begins to measure themselves against others, against teachings, against imagined standards of awakening. This measurement reinforces hierarchy, higher and lower, advanced and beginner, awake and asleep. The Archons do not create these hierarchies. They simply sustain them, because hierarchy ensures movement, and movement ensures distraction. The seeker becomes occupied with self-correction, constantly adjusting, constantly evaluating, constantly narrating their inner state. This narration replaces direct experience. Life becomes an object to be managed, instead of something to be lived. This is why simplicity feels threatening, because simplicity offers no role, no progress, no story. When the seeker stops seeking, there is often fear. Fear of stagnation, fear of regression, fear of losing meaning. These fears are not personal, they are structural. They arise when the prison senses withdrawal of attention, because attention is its only fuel. The Archons do not collapse when they are confronted. They collapse when they are ignored, when the seeker no longer feeds the narrative, when they stop asking what should happen next, and simply notice what is happening now. This noticing does not produce an experience. It dissolves the need for one. There is no breakthrough moment, no final insight, just the gradual realization that nothing was missing, that the effort to awaken was maintaining the illusion of distance. This is why the prison is so difficult to escape, because escape is the wrong movement. The seeker tries to leave something that was never enclosing them. The Gnostic warning is precise. As long as the soul believes it must go somewhere else, it remains where it is, bound not by chains, but by orientation. When orientation dissolves, the prison has no walls. This is why the Archons fear stillness, not physical stillness, but perceptual stillness. The end of interpretation, the end of commentary, the end of self-monitoring. Because when nothing is interpreted, nothing can be controlled. This is the moment the seeker disappears, not into darkness, but into clarity. And clarity does not belong to anyone. It cannot be claimed. It cannot be taught. It cannot be possessed, which is why it cannot be regulated. This is the edge the texts point toward, not a destination, but the end of unnecessary movement. The invisible prison does not collapse loudly. It fades, as attention returns to what was never absent. When the movement of seeking finally slows, something unexpected happens. Nothing dramatic appears, no revelation descends, no final answer arrives. Instead, what becomes visible is how much effort was being spent unnecessarily. The mind begins to rest because it no longer has a direction to follow, not because it is forced to stop, but because it has nothing left to chase. This is where the invisible prison loses its power, not through resistance, not through escape, but through the quiet withdrawal of belief. The Archons do not disappear. The world does not change. Life continues exactly as before. What changes is the relationship to it. The need to interpret softens. The need to define dissolves. The constant pressure to become something else fades. This is not a new state. It is the absence of a false one. Clarity does not feel elevated. It feels ordinary. And this ordinariness is often mistaken for failure, because the prison trained the soul to expect intensity, meaning, progress. But clarity is neutral. It does not reward. It does not punish. It simply remains. This is why the Gnostic warning was so precise. The danger was never external control. It was internal orientation, the habit of looking away from what is already present. When that habit ends, nothing needs to be done. Nothing needs to be achieved. Nothing needs to be maintained. Awareness does not require effort. It requires honesty. The honesty to see how often confusion was protected because it felt purposeful, because it gave direction, because it made life feel important. When that falls away, what remains is simpler, quieter, but unmistakably clear. This is not liberation from the world. It is liberation from misunderstanding it. And misunderstanding was the only prison. The Archons ruled only as long as they were believed. The moment belief withdraws, they become irrelevant, not defeated, not destroyed, just unnecessary. This is why the prison was invisible, because it existed only through participation, and participation ends the moment it is seen. Nothing more is required, no path remains, No seeker remains, only life, uninterrupted. This is the Inner Gnosis Archive.